Hey guys, and welcome back to a new Material 3 Expressive video in which we will cover button groups. That is a new composable, new UI component that the new Material 3 Expressive extension brings. In case you just randomly got to this video, it's actually part of a bigger playlist in which I cover all those new components of Material 3 Expressive. So it may make sense to start this playlist from the beginning on. Button groups are in the end a new composable that takes existing buttons and transforms these into either radio buttons or checkboxes. So here we have two types of button groups. On the one hand, a single choice button group where there must always be one option selected. So here we can simply select these options with these now new bouncy expressive animations. And the button group that these components are now wrapped into, in the end, just decides about which buttons here should have one unique selection among each. And this button group here around, in the end, just defines which combination, which group of buttons here should have or should share one selection in this case. The second button group here is a multi-choice button group. So here we have the option to select multiple components and have them active at all times. Little disclaimer before we get started with this. On the one hand, you need the Material 3, at least the alpha version here. When I record this video, this is the latest one. Or actually not. Is there? Okay, there's an alpha 6 already. Let's sync this. But either way, you need an alpha version at this point. If you're watching this later, you may use a stable version from 1.5.0 and up. But still a little bit disclaimer, this seems to be, at this point, the most buggy composable that is part of the Expressive extension. Yes, it's still an alpha, so I really expect these things to get fixed. But I really did not get to implementing this without this weird effect here of the components wrapping lines when actually extending this here with this material animation, which looks really weird, to be honest. Same thing here, even with pretty short item names here, this already happens. Also, what's pretty weird is that the new composable for these button groups does give us a so-called overflow icon. So an icon or a component that should show here at the end, in case all these components don't fit in the width here of our component, where we could then get some kind of a drop down or so to get the remaining items. However, that did never really show anything. And also when giving these items here a dynamic width, and that width has exceeded the available width, then our app just crashed. Maybe this is now fixed in the 0.6 dependency, but yeah, in the 0.4 alpha dependency, that wasn't yet fixed. Either way, let's get into coding and go to our buttons package and define our button groups composable to see how we could use that. Composable, button groups. And let's actually not just call this button groups, but let's call this a single choice button group, because I will, of course, show you both of these variants and how you can use these in your code. A single choice button group, in the end, has one dynamic element, one state that we need to update, and that is, well, which button is currently selected. So let's do that and define something like a selected index by remember, and that is an integer state where we say, okay, the initially selected index may just be 0. And we need to Alt-Enter here to import these operators get and set value, Alt-Enter twice, and then we can get started with defining this new button group composable. You'll notice that there is a deprecated variant and there is a new variant. This one here, this overload, is not deprecated, which takes in this overflow indicator. We have to pass that, but for some reason it did never show for me. So if we pass in the overflow indicator, that's now the composable, as I mentioned, that will show in case the buttons overflow the desired width that we gave it. So here we could, let's just have a text hello, but in my experiments, this has never shown, so it really doesn't matter what you pick here at this point. Later on, it hopefully does matter. For this button group, we also need to opt into this experimental material API, Alt-Enter, and to add this annotation here at the top. And in here, what's really interesting is that this content composable we get here is not a composable. So we can't place buttons or so in here. You will notice, hey, complaints, can't call a composable in here. Because the way this needs to be used is with this button group scope that we have access to here. And this button group scope gives us three types of normal functions, non-composables: custom item, toggleable item, and clickable item. So depending on what you want to call a different function here. If you just have a plain clickable button without any selection state or so, use this one. We will use a toggleable item here, which you can simply toggle on and off. And if you want to have completely custom content, then you can also use this custom item function, where you can define your very own group content and also menu content. So in this case, this button group would simply serve as a way to group your own custom components and maybe have a custom selection state between these or so, whatever. In our case, most likely you will also use this toggleable item function where we have a checked state, and this checked state should be true. So first of all, we want to have, let's say, 3 items, so for I in 0 to, well, let's say until 3, so 3 items. And then we know that this particular button that we now want to add here to our button group, we know that this is checked if I, so the current index for this button, is actually our selected index. And then we can move this toggleable item in here, and we can say checked is checked. The label, so the text of this button, should item and the current index, for example. When this changes on check change, we can then say our selected index is now the new index of this button, so I, and the icon composable that you can actually optionally choose here. So this is not mandatory to have icons for each button. But in our case, and in the demo that I showed you, this icon is only there if this is checked. So here with a check mark, and then for other items, there is no icon, which I think is also what makes the most sense. So let's add this check icon here to our drawable, right-click New Vector Asset, and then click on this clip art to search for a check mark. Here. There we go. Next and finish. And then we only want to have this icon if the checked state is actually true. And then in here we want to have another lambda because this icon parameter here wants us to implement a composable lambda. And we want to leave this as null if it's unchecked. And if it's checked, then we want to pass a composable lambda. So these curly braces here come from the if statement, and this is really the lambda that we want to assign only if checked. So we can say we have an icon here with an image vector, and we say vector resource, vector, what is it called? Image vector, sorry. Image vector dot vector resource, there it is. We use R, so our resources dot drawable, Alt Enter to import R, and specifically the one from our own package here, compile coding Material3 Expressive, reference our drawable folder, and then reference our checkmark icon. Then we want to give this a content description of null, and very importantly here at the end of this if statement curly braces, we want to say else null, and then all this will also be recognized as the normal composable lambda. If we now call this composable in our main activity here in the box, well, let's actually make this a column so we can have our both button groups that we will implement here in a column-wise fashion. So here on the one hand, we need horizontal alignment, setting this to center horizontally, I would say. And vertical arrangement we can set to arrangement center as well. Maybe with a bit of spacing. So we could say spaced by 32 dp, and then we say alignment center vertically. So this will center everything in this column vertically and at 32 spacing between components. In here, we can now call our single choice button group and launch this and take a look at how this will look like. There we go. You can see also the shape here is changing a little bit depending on the selection state. That is again implemented by the button group composable. And we should now be able to actually toggle here. And you can see how weird this looks like if we don't give these buttons a fixed weight, which I'll show you in a moment. But here, the width of this row is in the end exactly how much width it needs. And the moment it exceeds that width by animating this here, you can see it actually doesn't increase the width of this entire button group component, but it somehow needs to shrink down these components. So it seems like they didn't give these texts here that we assign in this toggleable item for the label. They didn't give these a single line parameter, but even then they would be cut off, which is not what we would guess. So here I would actually expect the entire button group to dynamically extend in width as long as there is remaining width, which is definitely the case here. You can see that's super weird. I'm not sure if I'm missing anything. If I am, then tell me, but I think I used this composable and component as it is intended, and there really aren't that many more parameters here except for the weight one we can assign to give each of these buttons here an equal weight. Then you will see that each button will simply take the same spacing. And then since each button has a bit more flexible width, we also have these issues here. Less could still happen if we now hit here. Okay, no, in this case, actually not. Yeah, now we actually have a completely working button group, but we need to take care of this width. And on smaller screens, it could again happen that these wrap lines, which is pretty weird, but I'm pretty sure they will fix this. Another thing that I mentioned is this overflow indicator. Let's not give them a weight because then they will just be evenly distributed across this width of the component. If we remove this and we say we maybe have 5 items, then, okay, now it shows that then they have actually fixed that with this new Alpha 6 version, because in Alpha 04, this did not work. But now you can actually see our overflow indicator showing here at the end, our hello text. Of course, doesn't make sense with the text hello, but we maybe have something like a filled tonal icon button here, where we say, okay, on click, here we would show some kind of a drop-down menu, and the icon can then be an image vector that we maybe create an icon for here in our drawable vector asset. And we say, menu, something like this. Or do we have the, what it's called, keep up menu? No, these 3 vertical, here, more vertical. Next, finish. Let's just copy this icon from below, paste it here for our overflow indicator. And here we say we have our more vertical menu. And then if that actually is clicked in here, we actually do get this button group menu state from this composable. So it will reference that state. And the button group already contains the necessary dropdown that we want to show here. So with the remaining options that currently aren't shown. And we can simply use this state in here and call show or dismiss if you want to dismiss it, which in our case is already handled automatically, I guess. So let's relaunch this and see how this looks like. So here we now have our more icon. And if we click it, then here's our 4th item that we could now check. And you can see now our single choice is on this 4th item here. And if we click one of these again, well, that issue is still there. But that way we can actually have infinite options here and automatically show this overflow menu the moment some of these options overflow. Well, at least that part of the button group is fixed. The other part here, yeah, I think that really requires fixing because this is probably not how the composable is meant to be used. But I would say, in addition to this single choice button group, we also create a little multi-choice button group. So we copy that, paste it below, and make this a multi-choice button group where we don't have a single selected index, but in the end, a list of selected indices. So val selected indices is equal to remember, and here we could just use something like a mutable state list of or so of integers, where we include all those indices that are selected. And well, it will use the same button group composable, it will use the same toggleable item, and we just need to make sure that multiple toggleable items can now have a checked state. It will be checked not if I is equal to the single selected index, but if I, as the index of this item, is actually in our selected indices list. And when we check this, we just need to check if it's now checked, or let's call it new checked. If new checked is true, then that means we simply want to take our selected indices and we add this index I here to this list that this item is now checked. And otherwise, we say selected indices dot remove, and we remove our index I. Well, let's actually make a safety check here that we check if the element is really in the list by just checking if I is in selected indices. Then we want to remove it, and here we would want to add it. I think this is safer because we really check if this is really contained in the list. That way, we can now go to main activity and call our multi-choice button group down here, relaunch that, and here we go. Let's take a look at all those items. You can see these items now fit inside of a single row, but I guess the moment we check some of these, there won't be enough space. Yep, and then they will transform into these into this more menu, and now we can actually select multiple of these, where there will just be as many shown as we can fit into this row here. And if we tap here, then we can also select the 4th item, and all the other ones will now remain checked. So I think this is a really nice way and alternative to normal radio buttons and checkboxes to just make these elements, and especially the check ones, a bit more prominent. But yeah, right now, as this feels like this is really not an option to use, but I guess it won't take long for them to fix these issues, because I can't see any way of you not being aware of this issue. In case I'm missing something, let me know in the comments. But I don't think I missed any type of parameter here. I really checked everything. You could perhaps bypass this manually by using the custom item composable here and defining these buttons manually, but then you also need to define these expressive animations for the shapes and so on. Probably not what you want. So let's just hope for a future update that it fixes this. Other than that, if you want to learn with our premium content, our website is down below. So whether that is premium courses, mentorship programs, whether that is our gamified campus community to just help you practice more efficiently and better, check it out. And other than that, thanks so much for watching this video. I will see you back in the next one, which will also be about Material3 Expressive, or there will at least be next ones. I'm not sure if the next one will also be an Expressive one, but make sure to stay tuned with this playlist, watch the next ones. Have an amazing rest of your week. Bye-bye.